Hello and welcome to the V-Ray for Form Z Quick Start video concentrating on materials. This video will take a look at V-Ray materials and their integration in Form Z. Now let's go ahead and take a look at a Form Z material by double-clicking on a material in the Materials palette. Notice that there's a new material type. Below the shaded and render zone materials, there is now a V-Ray material type. Now, if I switch this material to a different material type, notice that many of the settings already set, like the color in this instance, carry over to the new type. Notice that the preview in the top right of the Material Parameters palette has a live preview of the material rendered in V-Ray. First, let's go through an overview of the V-Ray material editor inside Form Z. Notice that there are several different methods, aka presets, that allow you to quickly create different material types. There is generic, which includes enough parameters allowing you to easily create any simple material. There's liquid, with the power to create a liquid material look with a quick selection of simple settings. There are several others, such as car paint for car finish, as well as emissive, which creates a glowing material that can give off light. Notice that as I switch between these different materials, many of the base selections remain the same, like the purple color of the original material. The last method in the list is called Use V-Ray Material File. This means you can use an external V-Ray material file that uses the standard Vr8 file format. In this example, I'm using the grassy Vr8 file. You can also edit these files using the Vr8 editor, which is an external editor that comes with V-Ray for Form Z. It's a fully featured material editor that includes different sample scenes as well as an advanced tab offering more advanced features for some truly complex materials that you can use in Form Z, or really any application that has the V-Ray plugin installed. Now, when you're done editing your material, you save the material to a file using the File menu. But since I don't need to save my changes here, I'll just close out of the material editor. Now I'm switching this material back to its previous settings. Notice one last setting, the Treat as Transparent for Override checkbox you can see here. Now, you'll want to turn this checkbox on if this material was a transparent material, like for glass. So if you use a material override, like we used in our previous video on lighting, this material will be treated as a transparent override. Let me show you more. Let's first navigate to the V-Ray settings palette, then to the material override section. Here you can select separate material overrides for transparent and for opaque materials to be overridden in the scene. So the Treat as Transparent for Override checkbox tells V-Ray to treat that material with the transparent material override that you set in the V-Ray settings when using material overrides. Now, this is useful if you have several glass materials in a model and you want them to all render as a single simple override for either draft studies or conceptual renderings. Finally, with V-Ray for Form Z comes an expansive library of preset V-Ray materials for easy use. Over 500 unique materials in external Vr8 files are in this categorized library for all sorts of surface looks for your scenes. Now, I'm going to render the scene to see what we've got. Notice that before the scene starts rendering, a Vr8 Resources dialog pops up stating that some of the resources are actually missing. This potentially can happen when a project moves between different users or different machines, and V-Ray is not able to find where these files live. Now, you can always go through the list and relink each individual file one by one, but there is also a Search Paths function allowing you to select a folder that contains the missing links, such as an external library on your network. Here I'll add the Materials folder and click OK. Notice that the missing resource is no longer listed here. With that, I'll hit OK and the rendering starts. And you can see the grassy material showing up here in the foreground now that all the resources are available and can be found. Now you can also find a scene's resources by going to the V-Ray settings palette and clicking on the V-Ray Resources button here at the bottom. This lists all the resources for that scene, and you'll notice that each resource indicates a yes in the found column, which is good. Now, the scene is looking pretty decent, but there are a couple materials that I'd like to change. First, this glass needs to be a little bit more tinted and looking more realistic. Also, this gray material here needs to look more like concrete. I'll select the glass material here. I could go through the material editor and create my own glass, but there's already an excellent selection of glass materials in the library. For this demo, I'll change this material to a different material type. I'll go with shaded. Now, let's go to the glass library folder and find a glass. I'm going to select the glass window cement gray material. Now, I can either double click it or drag the material on top of the existing material, as you see here. Notice that all of the settings change appropriately. Typically, it's a good idea to tick the Treat as Transparent for Override checkbox so that this material can be overridden as a transparent or glass material if you use material overrides. Next, I'll change this gray material to a nice looking concrete. I'll select the exposed concrete material in the scene so I can change it. It's set to a shaded material, so I'll first set the material type to V-Ray. I'll leave this set to generic method. Now, let's set the diffuse texture. The default for this right now is a color, but there are many different types of textures that I can use available, including many different procedural texture types such as cellular and tile. This time I'm going to use an image file. The image I'm using for this example actually comes with V-Ray for Form Z, and it's called concretef.diff.jpg, which can be found in the directory shown below. Next, I'll add a bump map to the material so that there can be some three-dimensionality to the material surface when I render. I'll use concretef.bump.jpg, which can also be found in the same folder as I mentioned earlier. Notice that the material updates in the preview here, and the diffuse texture is shown in the viewport, as you can see. So this way we can make sure the mapping looks good without needing to render the scene. Now, I'll render the scene to see how the whole thing looks. And, as you can see, the glass and concrete materials are looking much better now. Using materials is a pretty straightforward but still powerful process, allowing you to make simple as well as more complex materials really easily for use in your scene. Thank you for joining us for this quick start video on materials in V-Ray for Form Z.